As the world comes to know Jungkook as a global icon, BTS's lead vocalist with millions of pairs of eyes admiring him, few know that in his childhood, there were odd whispers circulating in the neighborhood where he grew up. Whispers that never made the news. Whispers that were deliberately buried by adults who at that time thought it was just a child's imagination. But now, years after Jungkook left Busan and his name shook the world, a childhood friend has finally revealed something that gives a lot of goosebumps. Little Jungkook, according to him, has senses that other children don't. Busan in the early 2000s was not a quiet city. The harbor, the sound of ships, the narrow alleys with the salty smell of the sea, and the rows of old houses huddled together bear witness to the childhood of many children including Jungkook. It was there that he ran, fell, laughed, and was silent for too long for the size of a child of his age. He often stopped suddenly, said the man who asked to remain anonymous. His voice was deep, almost trembling, as if reopening a door that had been locked tightly in his memory. It's like hearing something we didn't hear. By his admission, little Jungkook was not a strange child in the usual sense. He is cheerful, quick to learn, and sociable. But there are certain moments when his expression changes. His eyes no longer focused on his friends, but instead stared at a single blank spot, the corner of an alley, the end of a staircase, or even the seemingly ordinary evening sky to the other children. What makes the hair stand on end, says his friend, is what often happens after those moments. One afternoon, they played ball near an empty house that had been uninhabited for a long time. Jungkook suddenly stopped the game and said quietly, "We don't play here today." No one is listening. 5 minutes later, an old wooden plank fell from the second floor of the house, hitting the ground right where they had stood before. The incident, according to his friend, was not the only one. There are days when Jungkook refuses to go a certain way, cries for no apparent reason, or asks to go home early with a pale face. A few hours later, news of minor accidents, adult fights, or unpleasant events is often heard from the same location. Is that a coincidence? The question haunts his peers even into adulthood, but at the time, they were just kids. The parents laugh at their stories, calling Jungkook simply too sensitive or easily frightened. In a harsh and realistic environment like Busan, there is no room to talk about the inexplicable. But little Jungkook did not stop showing that strange sensitivity. According to the same testimony, Jungkook often woke up at night and refused to go back to sleep. He said his dreams were too real. He can describe events that have not yet happened, not as a clear forecast, but rather a feeling, something unpleasant or heavy, in the chest. He never said he saw a ghost, his friend insisted. But he always knew when something was going to happen. That's the scariest thing. Even more disturbing is one incident that still makes the man doubt whether he should ever talk about it publicly. One rainy day, Jungkook refuses to go into an old building that they often use as a shelter. He stood outside, staring at the door with a serious face that little children are not used to. "In the cold," he said. The weather that day was hot and humid. Shortly thereafter, an elderly neighbor was found unconscious inside the building from suffocation. No one was seriously injured, but for kids their age, the events felt too synchronized to ignore. Did Jungkook feel it? Or is he just a child who is very sensitive to changes in the environment? Those questions were never answered. Jungkook grows up, moves away, and eventually leaves Busan to pursue a dream that even his friends dare not imagine. The little stories settle, turning into vague memories that only appear occasionally in dreams. Until one day, after seeing Jungkook standing on the world stage with the same gaze, a focused gaze, as if feeling something deeper than just music, his little friend realized, there is a part of Jungkook that never changes. "It's the same," he said slowly, "like when he was a kid, like when he knew something before we all knew." Does the world see only talent, hard work, and dedication? while ignoring the other, quieter, more mysterious side? Or is the story of Jungkook's sixth sense just a narrative built from too many coincidences? In Busan, those alleys still exist. The old houses are still standing, and some people who once knew little Jungkook still keep stories that they have not dared to tell completely. This is just the beginning. The kid knows too much. When adults in Busan start to feel uncomfortable with little Jungkook asterisk, is it natural for a child to begin to be shunned not because of his mischief, but because he too often says things that turn out to be true? In Busan, the story of little Jungkook doesn't stop at coincidences that leave his friends speechless. It is only after the incidents recur that something quieter and more dangerous begins to happen, not to Jungkook, but to the way the adults view him. Jungkook's childhood friend recalls one big change that happened slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first it was just a small ban. Don't play too long with Jungkook. Just go home first. Somewhere else. No one has ever explained the reason directly. Our parents didn't say Jungkook was a bad boy, he said. They just said, he's weird, and the word weird sounds like a warning. In the environment in which they grew up, strangeness was not something to celebrate. Busan is a city of workers, a port city where people live by a simple logic. What is visible, that is real. Anything beyond that is considered dangerous, or at least should not be touched. But little Jungkook seemed to keep touching that limit unconsciously. He often says things that make adults speechless. A short, innocent statement with no intention of scaring but felt too appropriate. About who will get sick, about which houses it is better not to enter, about certain days that are not good for going out. What makes adults even more uneasy is one simple fact. Jungkook never sounds like a child making up stories. It's not dramatic. He didn't scream. He wasn't trying to convince anyone. He just said, then shut up. If other children scare, they laugh, said his friend. Jungkook never laughed after saying that. One afternoon, a mother in the neighborhood had a small accident on the steps of the house. Not serious, but enough to make a scene. A few hours earlier, Jungkook had told his friends not to play near the stairs of the house because it was slippery, although not wet. Those words sounded trivial, until the incident actually happened. From that moment on, whispers began to be heard. Not hard, not open. Only conversations in the kitchen, behind the door, or when parents think their kids aren't listening. The child is too sensitive. He seems to know first. Better not get too close. None of those whispers sounded cruel, but precisely therein lies the danger. Fear wrapped in caring is often more effective at creating distance. Little Jungkook, according to his friend, began to feel it. It's still playing. He's still smiling. But there are long pauses in him. He would often sit alone, stare at the ground, or look at adults with a questioning expression, as if he wanted to know what he had done wrong. The most remembered by his friend was one incident in elementary school. A teacher called Jungkook into the classroom after class. No punishment, no anger, just those questions that sound strange to a child of his age. Where do you get such thoughts from? You dream a lot, don't you? Are you afraid of something? Jungkook didn't answer in the way adults expected. It does not explain. He's not defending himself. He just nodded slowly or shook his head, depending on the question. That attitude makes adults even more uncomfortable. If he lies, maybe we can get angry, said his friend. But he doesn't look like he's lying. That's what makes adults confused. At some point, there was one incident that almost changed everything. That day, their ward held a small event. A lot of people, lots of kids. Jungkook has been restless since morning. He refused to participate in certain games and repeatedly said he wanted to go home early. When asked why, he simply replied, later crowded and some fall. Some adults hear it, some chuckled a little, some frowned. Shortly thereafter, a child slipped in the crowd and suffered minor injuries. Not bad, not tragic, but enough to make the atmosphere turn cold. For the first time, an adult said in a quiet but firm voice, "Don't let him talk like that anymore." The sentence was not directed directly at Jungkook, but he heard it. From that day on, Jungkook rarely spoke about how he felt. He didn't stop feeling it, his friends were sure of it, but he learned to keep it to himself. As if he were aware what he knows should not be spoken, his friend said in a deep voice. The question now is no longer whether little Jungkook has a sixth sense or not. Even more disturbing questions arise. What happens to a child when he is forced to suppress something that he does not even fully understand? Has the sensitivity disappeared? Or does it just change shape into something quieter, deeper, and perhaps heavier? Jungkook's childhood friends believe that those years shaped one important thing in Jungkook: the ability to keep quiet, to observe, to feel without having to explain. And maybe, just maybe, that's the reason why the adult Jungkook is often seen deep in thought, even amid the cheers of millions. But this story has not yet come to the most difficult part to tell. There was still one incident, an incident involving adults, a strict ban, and a night in Busan that made little Jungkook cry silently. Events that to this day make his friend doubt. Should little Jungkook ever be considered dangerous just because he's too sensitive? That night Jungkook didn't cry out loud, the incident that made all adults choose silence. What if one night in a child's life is enough to get the adults to agree that something should not be talked about anymore? Not because it is unimportant, but because it is too scary to admit. In Busan, there are nights that are not recorded in any book, not in the report, not to be a big gossip, but it remains alive in the memories of those who experienced it. One of those nights, according to the testimony of Jungkook's childhood friend, was the night when all doubts turned into real fears. The day seemed ordinary, no bad signs. The sky was clear, the sea breeze was blowing slowly, and the children played until the sun was almost setting. Jungkook, as usual, is quieter than the other kids. He's not depressed, just agitated. His friend clearly remembered one little thing that at that time was not considered important. Jungkook several times turned his head towards the empty house at the end of the alley, the same house that had not been inhabited for a long time, whose doors were always tightly closed, and whose windows seemed to stare back at anyone who passed by. "There's a voice," Jungkook said quietly. No one heard him but his friend who was standing closest. The other children laughed, ran, and ignored him. But Jungkook didn't laugh. He was even more silent, as if listening to something that could not be explained in words. The night began to fall faster than usual. Around 9 o'clock, several adults gathered near the empty house. There are certain reasons that are still vague even to those who witness them. Some say they want to make sure the house is safe. Some also mentioned reports of strange sounds from the inside. Clearly, Jungkook wasn't supposed to be there. Yet he saw them, and before anyone could stop him, he said one sentence that made the atmosphere change drastically. "Don't come in tonight." The sentence is not pronounced with a shout. There is no panic tone. It was precisely his calmness that made several adults look at each other. A man chuckled and said that Jungkook had watched too many scary stories. Yet one other adult did not laugh. "Why?" he asked briefly. Jungkook was silent for a long time, too long for the size of a small child who just spoke. His eyes did not look at anyone. He stared at the door of the house. "If it opens now, there are those who do not go home with the same feeling," he replied. That sentence, according to his friend, made the air feel heavy. No one can explain why. No one can call it a threat or a prophecy. But the words stuck, infiltrated the minds of adults who were previously sure that everything could be explained logically. Still, the door was opened. What happened inside the house was never told in detail. There is no official report. There are no widely circulated horror stories, but when the adults came out, their faces changed. Not fear, not panic, rather shaken. One of them looks pale, the others were silent for too long, no screaming, no panic, only the silence felt wrong. And in the midst of that silence, Jungkook stood still. He said nothing more. That night, Jungkook was brought home faster than usual. His friend followed from a distance and saw something that, until now, he had found it difficult to tell without taking a deep breath. Jungkook didn't cry out loud. He cried without a sound. Tears flowed, but his body was stiff. It was as if he was holding something too big to come out in the form of a normal cry. The adults around him did not scold him, nor calm him down with a warm hug. They looked confused and maybe a little scared. The next day, the change happened so fast. Children are not allowed to play around the empty house. Parents are asked not to exaggerate the story. Teachers at Jungkook's school have become more alert, more formal, and most noticeably, Jungkook was asked to no longer talk about how he felt without being asked. There is no word punishment. There is no term danger, all wrapped in soft and logical sentences. But for little Jungkook, the message was clear. Silence is the safest option. After that night, his friend said in an almost whispered voice, Jungkook changed. He was still the same child, hardworking, talented, and kind. But there was a new distance in him. It is no longer spontaneous. He often harbors feelings, channeling them through drawing, singing softly, or staring blankly for too long. Did the senses disappear? His friend wasn't sure. Instead, he believes the opposite. Jungkook is learning to control something he never asked to have. And this is where the most controversial part of this story appears. Some adults in the neighborhood, according to testimony circulating, had considered taking Jungkook to someone who understands better. Not an ordinary doctor, not the teacher, unless someone is supposed to be able to explain things that don't make sense. That plan never happened. Why? No one knows for sure. Some say Jungkook's parents balked. Some believe someone suggested that Jungkook's childhood be allowed to proceed normally. Or maybe, and this is the most disturbing, everyone chooses to forget for fear of what they might hear. What is clear, after that night, the story about little Jungkook began to disappear. Not because he stopped feeling, but because the surrounding environment ceases to be curious. Now, years later, as Jungkook stands on the world stage, the question reemerges from a long-buried memory. Does the world only see the end result, a big star without ever understanding what he had to hide from childhood? And if Jungkook really has an unusual sensitivity, was the decision to silence him a protection, or was it precisely the first wound that shaped him? There is still one part that has not been revealed. The part where Jungkook begins to realize that what he feels can be channeled, not through words, but through music. And that's where this story changes direction. He no longer talks, but he hears everything. When Jungkook found a way to survive through music. Is it possible for a child to stop talking about what he feels, not because he doesn't feel it anymore, but because he finds another way to channel it? After that never-named night, little Jungkook entered a phase that left many adults feeling relieved. He no longer speaks the words that make the atmosphere freeze. He no longer gives warnings that are difficult to explain. He looked normal. But for his childhood friend, the change felt even more alarming. He kind of moved everything inside, his friend said, and kids our age usually don't know how. Jungkook began spending more time alone, not because he was shunned, even though the distance was still there, but because he chose silence. They sit longer than other children, listening to ambient sounds with unnatural intensity, even when nothing sounds obvious. He begins to be sensitive to the little things, the sound of steps, the change in the tone of an adult's speech, a barely audible subtle clink. It is as if his world is filled with layers of sounds that others are not aware of. And that's where music came into his life, not as entertainment, but as a necessity. It was simple at first. Songs played at home, melodies from television. The rhythm is heard from the neighbor's radio. Jungkook doesn't just listen, he absorbs. His friend remembered how Jungkook could repeat certain notes exactly, even after hearing them only once. Sometimes he stopped walking just to hear the sound, he said. It's like making sure of something. For Jungkook, music is not just sound. It is structural, pola, a safe place where feelings that are too great can be kept without having to be explained. What gives his friend goosebumps is how Jungkook reacts to certain songs. There was a song that made him suddenly silent. There was a tone that made him close his eyes. And there was a moment when he said quietly, almost as if talking to himself, "This part is heavy." Wait, the same word he used to describe bad days, uncomfortable places, and inexplicable feelings. Is music a substitute for the forbidden words? At school, the teachers begin to see Jungkook's other side. He is not a talkative child, but he is sharp. It quickly captures emotions in reading, in songs, in tone of voice. It's like someone is hiding something behind a smile. But unlike before, Jungkook didn't say it. He kept it. His little friend recalled a moment that until now made his chest tight. They are sitting on the stairs, listening to music from an old mobile phone. The song is ordinary, not sad, not cheerful. But Jungkook suddenly said, if this song is played at night, it feels like being alone even though it's crowded. No one asked where he knew. Probably because everyone has already learned one important thing. It is safer not to dig too deep. But that feeling never really went away. It just changes shape, become musical intuition, to be emotional. It was the ability to read the atmosphere that enabled Jungkook, one day, to stand on stage and make millions of people feel understood, without having to know them one by one. His friend believes that Jungkook has not lost his sixth sense. It's just tamming it. He learned how to live with it, she said, not against him. The most emotional was the confession he had only spoken after years of keeping it to himself. There are days when I feel guilty, he said quietly. We all chose silence because we let him study alone. He believes that if Jungkook hadn't invented music, this story might have ended differently. Not on a grand stage, not with cheers, except for the boy who never asked for anything. But music gave him a way out, a safe, accepted, even praised path. Ironically, what used to scare adults is now the reason the world loves them. Is that a coincidence? Or is it that since childhood, Jungkook was destined to turn a sensitivity considered dangerous into something that can be felt together? In Busan, his friend still remembers that little Jungkook look, a look that millions of people now see on the big screen. The gaze of someone who hears more, feels more deeply, and chooses to express it through tones, not words. But this story is not finished. There's still one last part, the most personal and most controversial part, about why his friend finally chose to talk now, after years of silence. And the question that remains at the end of it all is, does Jungkook himself still remember all this? Or does he choose to forget it in order to move on? Why only now? A belated confession. And a question left hanging. Why does a person choose to remain silent for decades, then suddenly decide to speak out? Not when the fear is still fresh, but when the world has changed and a small child has become a global figure. That was the most difficult question Jungkook's childhood friend from Busan had to answer. Even when he finally opened this story, his voice still sounded like one who doubted whether he was doing the right thing. I never intended to tell you this, he said, but there comes a point where silence feels more wrong than talking. The point, according to him, came not from the news, not from rumors, but from one simple moment. Seeing an adult Jungkook standing alone on the stage after the concert was over, looking down for a long time, as if listening to something that no one heard. "The gaze is the same," he said, "and I realized maybe all this is never really gone." Over the years, he and others in Busan chose to call all of those childhood events coincidences. The safest narrative, the most easily accepted. They grew up, worked, had families, and left those narrow alleys with deliberately obscured memories. But when Jungkook became a public figure, those old stories began to feel different. Not because I want to link it to a myth, but rather because there is a pattern that is difficult to ignore. Jungkook's emotional sensitivity, keen intuition, and ability to read other people's feelings without the need for explanation. Is it all purely the result of practice and life experience? Or is there something that has been around since childhood, something that used to be considered annoying, even harmful? His friend did not dare to give a definite answer. He instead rejects major labels such as sixth sense or special abilities. For him, this story is not about sensations, but about a child who is too sensitive for his own environment. "I don't want people to misunderstand," he said. "This is not a horror story. It's a story about a little boy who feels too much." And that's where the controversy begins. When this story was shared in a limited, careful manner, without excessive detail, reactions were mixed. Some call it collective imagination. Some say all children are sensitive at a certain age. There are also those who consider this story dangerous because it can burden Jungkook with a narrative that he never chose. But there are also those who feel touched. Those who grew up as children are sensitive. Those who were once asked to be silent because they were considered superfluous. Those who learn to channel feelings through art because there is no safe space to talk. To them, little Jungkook's story feels too real to ignore. Interestingly, there was not a single attempt to confirm or refute this story on the part of Jungkook. There is no clarification, no statement, there is no denial. The silence raises new questions. Did Jungkook choose to protect his childhood by not bringing it up again? Or has he reconciled allowing the past to live on in another form, through the music, expression, and emotional connection he's built with his fans? His little friend didn't know the answer. He wasn't even sure Jungkook still remembered those nights in Busan in the same way. "Maybe for him it's just a piece of feeling," he said, "not an incident." And perhaps that's where the quietest truth lies. That this story does not need to be fully believed to have any meaning. That he could live as a reflection on how society treats children differently. About how adult fears can shape the way a child survives. If little Jungkook did have an unusual sensitivity, then the adult world around him chose one simple solution: to silence him for the sake of order. But from that silence, music was born. From that fear, empathy grows. And from the child who used to be asked to be silent, came an artist who made millions feel heard. Is that a coincidence? Or is it the irony of this story? In Busan, old houses still stand. Narrow alleys still keep echoes of the footsteps of children who once ran there. And among all those memories, there is one story that has never been written in any book, the story of little Jungkook, who probably knew too much, too early. This story does not demand answers. He just left a question. And maybe for Jungkook that's enough.